the triunity of God as a subject this evening, and it is with some fear and trepidation that one approaches this subject because of the actual nature of the discussion. We are talking about what God has revealed concerning Himself, and I make no apologies for the fact that our subject this evening will be Christian theism. I will not attempt to address any other type of theistic belief other than the Christian viewpoint because of the very nature of what we're addressing. We are addressing information that God has revealed about Himself. And that is a buzzword amongst Christians. We're used to hearing ideas like God revealing Himself, but that is actually foundational to everything else that we will do this evening. A lot of things we will talk about tonight are attributes of God, are facts about God that we could not know outside of God's graciously revealing them to us. That man's knowledge and man's wisdom could not, in and of itself, come to conclusions that are given to us by Scripture itself. And so that leads me to a foundational statement, and that is, when we look at the nature of God, we are looking at the nature of God on the basis of God's revelation, and that is the Bible. The comments that we have will be based upon and will demand adherence to the tenets of Scripture. And we will frequently refer to the Bible and to its teachings in looking at what God has revealed about Himself, because it is the only way that we can know that what we believe is true and that we are indeed following God's revelation and His revelation of Himself. So, as we look at the nature of God, we first start with some of the most basic information, and that is the attributes of God. What are the attributes of God? Well, on our outline this evening, we have divided the attributes of God up into three classifications. First, the natural attributes of God. Secondly, the attributes of God pertaining to His infinity. And third, the attributes of God pertaining to creation. Now, it is important to note that it is impossible to divide God up along black and white lines into specific compartments where you will not have any overlapping. You will discover that many of the attributes that we list here overlap with one another in what they are attempting to express and say. But that's just simply the nature of what we're dealing with. You can't put God under a microscope and divide Him up and put Him in that type of a scientific, rigorous examination. So when we look at even the broad classifications, for example, the attributes pertain to His infinity, the attributes pertain to creation, some of those will overlap. We will see some things that look somewhat similar, but for convenience and for examination's sake, we'll look at this. So under the natural attributes of God, we have three attributes. That is spirituality, personality, and life. First of all, God is spirit. In His very nature, He is spirit. That is, that God is not, in and of Himself, a material being. God is not limited to the material realm. This is over and against such ideas as pantheism, for example, that would connect God intimately with the physical realm. The God of the Bible is spirit, and He is not limited to the physical realm because, as we will see, He is the creator of the physical realm, and He existed before the physical realm existed itself. In John 4:24, Jesus told us that God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and in truth. Part of His very nature, His way of existence, is that of spirit. Secondly, God is personal. This is very, very important because as we face the onslaught of various new philosophies today that would attempt to tell us that we are a part of God and God is a part of us, and have movie stars standing on beaches saying, "I am God, I am God, I am God," we need to, against that, proclaim the biblical truth that God is personal. And because God is personal and we are created in His image, man too is personal. What does it mean to say that God is personal? In Exodus 3:14, when God revealed Himself to Moses, He said, "I am that I am." God realizes He exists. He has the attributes of personality. He is aware of his own self-existence. He is aware of the existence of other things. He has feelings and emotions. These things are those things that are attached to a personal being. God is not an it. God is not the supreme force. God is not some cohesive factor to creation. God is personal. This is very important because many of the modern philosophical teachings about God will actually redefine God as an impersonal force. The Christian cannot allow this. This is not accurate from the Christian perspective whatsoever. Thirdly, God is life. That is, He is alive. He is the source of all life. All other living things are derivative from and dependent upon God. All other life that exists owes its existence to God and depends for support upon God. God is alive. In Jeremiah chapter 10, verses 6 through 11, you have the comparison that Jeremiah draws between the dead gods of the idols and the true God, who is described as the living God, the eternal God. God is the source of life. He is living. He is alive. Now, these refer to God in His nature. By nature, He is personal. By nature, He is spirit. By nature, He is living. Now, the next series of attributes we will look at are those that pertain to His infinity. And as we look at them, you'll understand what it is when we say pertain to His infinity. For example, the first of these is absoluteness. Or as you may notice, another term that would be applicable would be uniqueness. What does this mean? For a long time, I didn't really have a full understanding of what this exact word meant when referring to God. I understood that God was the absolute of good and the absolute of love and things like this. But in reality, when we refer to God Himself as being absolute, what we are referring to is that God is the foundation of, the grounds of, all else that exists, and all else that exists, to have its proper meaning and to be understood properly, must be related to this personal, infinite God. Since He is the creator of all that is, since He is the absolute standard of all that is, if one wishes to know truth, if one wishes to know meaning, if one wishes to know right, then we must be related to God, and we must relate each individual thing in creation to God. No individual thing in and of itself, by itself, separated from its created status, has meaning outside of its relationship to God and God's purpose in making it. That is a very vital truth that especially our culture needs to hear about today. And unfortunately, our culture has abandoned that type of a concept and that type of a worldview. Secondly, God is sovereign. God is supreme. God does not depend upon the created order, is not frustrated by the created order. God is not contingent upon the created order. There are a number of passages. Look at Isaiah chapter 43, verses 12 through 13. Isaiah 43, 12 through 13. Here God says, I have revealed and saved and proclaimed, I and not some foreign God among you. You are my witnesses, declares the Lord, that I am God. Yes, and from ancient days I am He. No one can deliver out of my hand. When I act, who can reverse it? God here points out that one of the differences between the true God and the false gods that He is engaged in argument about here in the book of Isaiah, between about chapters 40 and 50, is that one of the things is that the false gods have no ability to act, whereas the true God is sovereign. When He acts, no one can reverse it. The false gods can be frustrated by man's attempts and man's will, mainly because they don't really exist and they are the figment of men's imaginations in the first place. But God says that He is sovereign none can deliver out of his hand. Look at Isaiah chapter 46. In Isaiah 46:9, God says, "Remember the former things, those of long ago. I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please." Now this eternal God points out that it is His will that will be accomplished, that He will do all that He pleases. In fact, the psalmist had said that long time ago in Psalm 135:6, and a number of other places in the Psalms, of course. But in Psalm 135:6, the psalmist wrote, "The Lord does whatever pleases Him in the heavens and on the earth, in the seas and all their depths." These are just a few of the many, many passages that could be called upon to demonstrate for us the fact that scripturally the God of the Bible is sovereign and supreme in His universe that He has created. The third attribute pertaining to His infinity is that of self-existence. This is important as well. God does not depend upon anyone or anything at all. God is self-existent. He can say, "I am," and stop right there. When we say "I am," we say, "I am because I have the proper atmosphere, because I have the proper oxygen, because I have the proper light and food and water, etc., etc., etc." We are contingent beings. At any point in time, we could simply cease to exist in the state that we currently are. But God is not like that. God is self-existent. We owe our existence to God. But God owes His existence to no one and no thing. God does not need anything. I know you've frequently heard it said, well, God was lonely, and so He created man. Well, I don't believe God was lonely, because that would be an imperfection in God. And when you look at the fact that, as we will see later in this evening, that God is triune, God wasn't lonely. I suppose if you're a Unitarian, you might say God was lonely, but God wasn't lonely. He doesn't need anything from man. God is self-existent. The fourth attribute pertaining to His infinity is immutability, which is a long word for saying unchangeableness. God does not change. He cannot change, because if you think about it logically for a moment, you'll realize that a being that undergoes change is growing and changing and experiencing, and in fact, you have to ask the question, the change that occurs, is it for the better or for the worse? A perfect being cannot change, because if he changes for the better, then he wasn't perfect in the first place. If he changes to the worst, he's no longer perfect. So God does not change, and of course this is not just simply a logical argument, but is also a scriptural argument. In the 102nd Psalm, verse 27, the psalmist, in describing, interestingly enough, in verses 25 and 26, the Creator and the distinction between the unchangeableness of the Creator and the changeableness of creation. And you might want to just note that this very passage, spoken of Yahweh God in Psalm 102, is quoted of Jesus Christ in Hebrews chapter 1.